Joining me now is Barry Friedman. He is the faculty director at the Policing Project at the New York University of Law. Barry, first of all, can I just get your reaction to really some incredible, shocking days, I think, for a lot of people across the United States? What's happened there?
I mean, it's incredibly troubling. Obviously, it all began with the killing of George Floyd, and that has set off widespread protests that are a reaction not only to that killing, but I think pent-up frustrations about years of how policing has been conducted in the United States.
Why does it keep going wrong? I mean, a lot of them have been shooting incidents. In this case, this is a terrible incident that has now been called a murder, where a policeman puts his knee on somebody's neck, and for about 9 minutes, it's incredible that this just seems to be happening again and again.
Yeah, I think the reason is because we talk about reform and accountability in the United States around policing, but we misunderstand what that means in a fundamental way. And until we fix that, we're never going to get it right. Here in the United States, when we talk about accountability in policing, what we mean is what we call at the Policing Project back-end accountability, which is something's already gone wrong. And we're just trying to assign blame to somebody. So we talk about criminal prosecutions and civil rights lawsuits and civilian review boards and even body cameras. But in the rest of government, and frankly in the rest of the world, accountability means allowing the public to have a voice in how government itself operates. And we don't do that around policing, and until we give the community and the public a voice in setting the rules regarding policing, we're not going to fix this problem.
And as I speak to you, I'm in London, and they have what's called policing by consent. It is a very different philosophy than armored cars and big guns and roll in hard and take them down mentality. I mean, now obviously it's a different community, and there are different demographics, and there are different issues with gun licensing and the fact that there aren't very many guns. But there is, I would say, a psychological difference about what a policeman is to the community and how he's part of that community. Would you agree with me that it's different than some of the cities in America?
I'm going to agree and disagree with you. I mean, I've spent some time in the UK, and there are differences around policing, but there are also some similarities, and so I'm not going to let you off the hook quite this easily. I think I would divide it into two separate categories. The first is, what we at the Policing Project focus on, which is actually regulating policing from the front end with rules and regulations, and I think that is more true in the UK and frankly very true in civil law countries. And then there's culture. And I do think the culture is different in the UK, but I also think you have issues with race, very acute issues with race. You have very, very serious issues, I think, with surveillance in the UK. And I know all is not happy in every corner. So I think there are similarities, but I do think that the problem is particularly acute in the United States at the present.
All right, so I want to talk to you about Camden, New Jersey, which you're well informed about. I mean, this has become a showroom for policing in America, because while we talk about all the things that are going wrong, is this a place in New Jersey where it seems to be going right?
Yeah, so, the former chief, the last chief in Camden is the co-chair of our advisory board at the Policing Project. The current chief we worked with before he took office as chief, he did quite a remarkable thing, which is he marched with a banner with protesters. And actually across the United States, what you see is that protests have quieted and things have been more understanding when the police have actually joined in and signaled some empathy for what's going on, as opposed to responding aggressively. And so Camden is a place where we've worked very closely with the police department, particularly on their use of force policy. It's a use of force policy that is extremely progressive, that puts the sanctity of human life first, that gives officers clear direction about what's required of them, which is not something that we do here in the United States. And it was a policy that was adopted, I want to point out, with the consent of the ACLU, which is the Civil Liberties Organization here, as well as the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, the police union in Camden. So this is a perfect example of what we believe in, which is all the stakeholders coming together to put clear policy in place on the front end that everybody can agree with. And it makes
And how would that translate into so help me understand, how would that translate into a policeman responding in Camden, New Jersey versus a policeman responding in Minneapolis?
Sure, well, if you go look at Minneapolis's use of force policy, it's a very old style use of force policy that tells the officers nothing other than to use force that's objectively reasonable. Camden spells out in very clear detail what is expected of officers every step along the way. And not only that, But once you have a clear policy in place, then you train to that policy, and then you expect compliance with that policy. And Camden follows that entire assembly line of how policy is supposed to be made and adhered to. And I do not believe that's the case in Minneapolis, though I will not claim to understand everything that is true in Minneapolis. I've looked at their use of force policy. I know they've had a consistent number of issues.
Do you think it starts at recruitment? The problem began right there. This officer had so many different complaints against him and was never removed.
Well, I do think we have to be thoughtful about recruiting, and that's not something here that we also do all the time. So if you look at recruiting advertisements across the United States, you'll find a wide variety. Some of them will show cops engaging with the community and, holding kids and working with people. And some will show cops, with big guns and rappelling out of helicopters. In fact, I was listening to a podcast from a former police officer at the Met who was laughing about these ads in the sense of, he didn't do a lot of rappelling from helicopters when he was with the Met, and that's true of most police officers. So I do think that we send important signals when we recruit about what the job is, and very often we send a misleading understanding of the job. The job is helping people. We ask police officers to be social workers, to be mediators. We don't train them for those things. We don't recruit them for those things.
So it sounds like you have some ideas
Just
about, okay, but I mean, it's not a lost adrift debate, is it? I mean, there are some pretty good ideas about how you recruit, how you deploy, how you talk about use of force, and how you give very firm guidelines to policemen that are going out, that force is a last resort, and it's just not something to protect yourself in an argument in a civil suit later on. So why can we not apply what we've learned to a lot of these different police departments, or how do we do that?
Well, it is a broken debate. I want to be clear about that. In the United States, it has degenerated into an us versus them. You're for the police or against them. I think that's ridiculous. Everybody wants safe neighborhoods and public safety, and they want people to be safe and go home at night, everyone. But we have to change our mindset about that. And one of the things we have to do is understand that, again, we, unlike most other countries, do not regulate the police. We simply tell them to, keep the peace, and then we leave it to them to figure out how they want to do it. And until we change that, until we start to involve legislative bodies and police commissions and the public at large, racial justice organizations in the decision about how policing occurs, it is not going to change in a helpful way.
It sounds like a long burn and a very long horizon. How do you come to terms with what has just happened now and offer the public some kind of shorter solution that can stop this from happening? Because that's the anger. That's what people want.
Well, I mean, everybody wants a short solution. We'd all like world peace and to end the pandemic tomorrow, but none of that's going to happen. We have to be ready for the long burn. On the other hand, I think incorporating this one understanding that we have to stop thinking we're going to fix policing by simply trying to point fingers at individual officers, though fingers should be pointed if things go wrong, but that we actually have to step back and think that policing is like every other aspect of government. It needs to be regulated from the top. So for example, we were talking about use of force. Police departments have use of force policies. They tend to do exactly what you just said, which is protect police departments in times of litigation after the fact. What we need to do is have use of force policies that are mandated by legislative bodies, most likely at the state level. And they have to reflect evidence-based policing, like the kind of policy, like the kind of thing you do at the College of Policing there. So we do have to change dramatically. We have to put regulation up front through legislative bodies. Otherwise,
no matter what, the benefit of the doubt seems to be going to policemen all the time. They can very easily justify the use of force. Should they not just be, should they not just have the same standards applied to them as any citizen does on the street? That force has to be proportionate, and if you go beyond the norm very quickly, you are in criminal trouble.
Yeah, I mean, it is different with the police than all other civil servants, if you think about it, and members of the public, if you think about it this way, in fairness, which is they are really the only civil servants or people who are asked to use force as part of their job in a way that would hold other people criminally liable. So it's a very tricky problem, and I do not want to minimize the scope of it. But having said that, yes, we are too quick to defer. A lot of blame goes to the Supreme Court here, which in a case called Graham versus Connor said, look, when something goes wrong, what we're going to ask is this: did the cop at that one moment use objectively reasonable force? But we're not going to look at all the moments that even led up to that moment. So we're not going to ask, 15 minutes earlier, could you have de-escalated the situation that avoided the use of force? So, that one standard that was put in place by the Supreme Court decades ago is what governs most of policing in the United States. And to fix it, we got to modernize. It is not a standard to guide conduct day to day on the street.